the first item was held in committee for further discussion, and 23015 was originally passed out of committee, and the full council last Tuesday sent it back to committee for further discussion. So with that, Deputy Wastewater Commissioner Morosky, DPW Commissioner Lenny Laxo, and Water Commissioner Mr. Healy.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Council Bean.
Say that I had met with some of the gentlemen earlier this week, and I just want to say I commend them for their package they put together. I thought it was very well done, detailed, and very comprehensive. I know it wasn't easy to do this, but it does give us a bigger picture and provide me a lot of the answers I was looking for. So I just want to thank them in the beginning for all this work they did towards this.
Piggybacking off that, Councilor Bean, I believe it's probably prudent that, and I believe we can do this, but having these documents made available online, because I believe the residents of the city should have access to this information as well.
Good idea.
That's just my opinion, because a lot of residents have inquired the same things that we've inquired about the status, the future of this project, because obviously they are the stakeholders in this, and they're the ones paying for it. So it would make sense to me if these were either entered into the minutes, but made available to the public for reading and view. President Hay.
And just to follow up on Councilor Bean's comments, I think the information they gave us is thorough and detailed, answers many of the questions that councilors had during the last Finance Committee meeting and during the City Council meeting last week. I think that each one of us, the bottom line is we're looking to get a clearer picture for ourselves and a clearer picture for the residents of Fitchburg as to where the project stands and what that means in relationship to rate hikes in the future. And I think this helps us get there and gets us to a point of saying, okay, this is what's happened, this is what they're projecting will happen, and how that will affect us. I mean, ultimately, I believe that we really don't have a choice in doing the work that is being mandated, because getting fines is not something that I eagerly anticipate or think we should put on the backs of the taxpayers, because they're the ones who pay the fines ultimately. So I think this should and will pass, but I think council has had legitimate concerns and questions that these gentlemen have worked diligently to answer, and most of those answers are in the packet. If anybody has questions, they can certainly ask them, and they will do their best to answer them. I had a meeting with a few of them and got my questions answered, so hopefully we'll make some progress tonight. Thank you.
So the first question I have out of the gate, or one of my primary questions, is I asked a couple of weeks ago about the consent decree itself, and not only where we are in this whole process, that's my first question, so where are we along in the process of fulfilling the consent decree? And secondly, is there any clause in the consent decree that allows for the city to reach out to DEP or EPA and have them come and assess what we've already done and see if there are items in the consent decree going into the future that they may be able to give us some latitude on and require that we don't, or mandate we don't have to do? Because I recall your predecessor indicated to the council years ago that there were tests that were done to start this whole thing. I think it was the phosphorus levels, and there were some other things where it had to be at a certain level. The consent decree, I think, and I may be butchering this, but he said 100% is what the consent decree says, but if we got it to like 60 or 70%, maybe we could stop there, and that satisfies the state and the federal government. So my first question, gentlemen, just for the public's own edification, is where do we stand on the project right now from a percent of completion standpoint? What is the forecasted timeline of when this whole effort's going to be finished? And thirdly, is there any clause in this contract that says we can have an assessment done or assessments done to see if we have to fulfill everything, or did we do enough to satisfy the mandates handed down to us? So those are my three questions that I wanted the public to have access to with regards to an answer.
Overall, the consent decree end duration as it's stipulated in the language of the consent decree. The end date referenced is December 31, 2030. And that's specifically referencing coming into compliance with combined sewer overflows, and that's related to our combined sewers. To not separate sewers 100% is not the same thing to say to not eliminate all combined sewer overflow releases to the environment. What we always wanted to avoid, if at all possible, was 100% separation of combined sewers. Now, that can only be possible if the remaining flowing capacity within the sewers is sufficient that it's not increasing within the pipe to a level where it's going to discharge out the overflow and release to the environment. With respect to the, if we have an ability to get out of anything that's required of us in the consent decree, the whole reason we got the consent decree in the first place had to do with violations of the Clean Water Act, the Massachusetts Clean Waters Act, and the NIPDES permit that we have for the city of Fitchburg. From everything I understand from EPA and Mass DEP, they're not going to be happy unless everything is fulfilled. What we can have latitude on is the duration or the timeline within which we come into compliance. Ultimately, the combined sewers aspect, we've got the end date of coming into compliance by December 31, 2030.
So we've got conceivably another roughly 14 years.
Approximately, correct.
Okay. And the other question I have is when these loans are taken out, are there reports that are run monthly or quarterly that show how we're doing against that loan specifically, costs that we've incurred, costs that we've accrued for? I mean, these are large loans, gentlemen. So, I mean, one of the concerns I had 2 weeks ago was we had a request originally for $22 million, and that went up by about $6 or $7 million, and it was a tremendous miss. So that, justifiably concerned myself and others about our forecasting accuracy, and I had some residents call me and say, well, they weren't indicating anything foul, but they were just saying, well, what does it matter if they miss? We have to do it. So they didn't like that explanation of that. Well, we have to do it. I mean, if we're going to miss by $6 or $7 million, the other concern that I had about missing that is how does this impact the overall program, the overall consent decree with regards to the rate study that we did 4 or 5 years ago, or the study that was conducted that said this is the amount of money that we'd have to raise to pay all this debt off. So this $6 or $7 million miss, there's two parts to this issue. Number one is how does that impact the rest of the loans going forward with regards to our estimating capability? But furthermore, there's a number we expected to spend throughout this whole project through 2030. Is that still the number? Or, and I know it's still halfway through, but are we in jeopardy of being over that number? There was a number that we arrived at that said this is what the total cost will be at that time. Is that still holding fast right now, or items like this one that went up $6 or $7 million put that in jeopardy? And these are top level answers I'm looking for. I'm not looking for specifics, but there was a number. So how are we stacking up against our original projections?
The figures that I believe you're referencing, Counselor, had to do with the presented figures that was presented to the Council in late May of 2012, immediately preceding request to accept and vote on to approve the consent decree. The estimated total that was presented at that time was approximately $105 million. And that was presented in a tabulated form in one of the 3 handouts provided to the Council. At that time, we had 2 real numbers in hand. We had a bid received for both the 2B3C separation project and also the first big capital project at the treatment plant, which was called CEPT, Chemically Enhanced Primary Treatment. So we had real numbers there, and then the end result on construction costs were pretty good for an end number. When we say a miss on the most recent project, the SSU project, it wasn't necessarily unit prices per se that were way underestimated. It was unanticipated scope that ended up getting added onto the project that wasn't foreseen at the time that the budgetary estimated number was prepared. And we also didn't have, we had only just had Wright Pierce under contract at the beginning of May 2012, at that same time when we were making a presentation to council. So they were very rough numbers.
So the 105 million, do we have any idea now that we're 4 or 5 years into it, if we're still holding to that 105, or is that going to be lower? Is that going to be more? Because the fact that there was unforeseen scope creep on this one, again, makes me concerned that added $7 million to the 105, if you will. You know what I mean? So
I do. And to be perfectly upfront with the council as well, the CSS 4D project, we ended up having scope added to that, so it appeared a larger number than what was in the estimate. We had John Fitch Highway sewer replacement added to the project. That was adding approximately 25% to the overall scope of the as-bid project. We had water infrastructure improvements that were a part of that project as well. And the actual work that was in the initial conceptual limit of separation for 4D, once we did investigations into that area, we found that there was a lot more work that had to be done than what was envisioned. So we ended up having costs for 4D, I believe in the initial figures. It was estimated in 2011 estimate to be approximately $9.4 million, and then the actual costs with all the extra scope that I just referenced is approximately 16.4.
almost double.
An additional $7 million approximately.
So back to my earlier question, how do we stack up against the 104 million that was estimated? Is this going to be more than 104 million?
I would expect.
I'm not holding you guys to this right now because I know we've got 15 more years left, but
Right.
I mean, there's got to be some kind of understanding or idea right now that, well, if we missed, and I shouldn't say missed, but if we underestimated the next project by 6 or 7 million and we overran the John Fitch one by 6 or 7 million, when you add it up, it sounds like we're going to be over the 104 because I don't think anything's getting cheaper from our original estimate.
I would have to agree with that.
Do you have any idea what that 104 is currently, ballpark?
I don't have that number, ballpark.
Could it be at least 120 million? Just based on this loan right here and the John Fitch project?
Based on CSS 4D, SSU, and unknown work associated with studies that are ongoing, that's not unreasonable.
So, right now where we sit after 4 years, and we've got 15 or 16 years left, the $104 million estimate is conceivably already blown. So, the studies that were conducted 4 or 5 years ago that gave the council some understanding of what this is going to mean to the ratepayers, that you can make a good argument right now doesn't bear any weight anymore. Basically, there needs to be a new study done as to, when I say study, I'm talking revenues versus expenses. If the loans are going to end up being 120 or 130 as opposed to 104, that means more expenses, which obviously means people are going to get hosed more on their bill. So it's imperative that, to me, there should be a review of this every year or every couple of years.
Understood.
But I asked earlier about when you have a loan taken out and you start incurring costs against that specific loan. I don't know if the auditor has the answer to this, but is it being tracked on a monthly basis as to how we're running? And if so, is that, I don't think it's specially, it's spelled out in the status E, right?
It actually is.
Yeah.
There's 4 funds that are in the status C that's distributed monthly. That Fund 30 is the general fund, and then we have Funds 63, 65, and 67 that deal with the water, wastewater, and airport. and they show the amounts after these loans are approved, that will be budgeted, and then you see the revenue coming in, the loans being, the loan money proceeds coming in, and then you see this expenditures along with it. Because like the regular budget, they have to stay within budget. And this is a good example where the budget, $23 million, is not enough, so they agreed to come back.
So, and I apologize, committee members, I'm asking a lot of questions here, but, so in the event of the John Fitch project, if the loan, let's say, is $10 million and it ends up costing us 16, what happens? Because we only authorized 10.
On that, there was an additional loan order that was authorized.
Yeah.
That's what I know
Sorry
that, but I'm,
about that, Ed.
just for the public,
Right.
because, sounds, okay, well, it was $6 million over, it was $6 million over, but there's a process you have to go through to get additional approvals.
That was actually incorporated within the loan order for that particular construction
Right.
project, and design for that matter.
So where I'll leave it right now from my chair for right now is two things. Number one is there has to be some sort of comprehensive rate study on our revenues and expenses going out till 2030. I know it's a ballpark in some instances, but this should be done on a recurring basis, every one or 2 years. And my concern right now where I sit, gentlemen, is this isn't going to look good, because if the estimate of 104 originally is now almost 130, or we don't really know what it is, but it can conceivably be as high as that, if not more. There were certain rate figures that were provided to us 4 or 5 years ago that the federal government themselves, knowing everything, said our residents could afford, which tells you right there how they don't know our residents, because we don't have a wealthy community here. So this is going to be a worse scenario that will pan out. And my second to last question is there anything in the works right now, gentlemen, on a rate study, a comprehensive rate study to ascertain what we're charging right now and how long that'll hold us until those loans that we've incurred start to creep up and we don't have the revenue structure to pay for them? Is that in the process, or will that be in the process in the near future to start doing a study like that?
We haven't had a Water and Wastewater Commission meeting since the previous Finance Committee meeting in, I believe it was November 24th when we had that meeting. But based on the feedback I received from Finance Committee that night, I incorporated into the wastewater agenda for this coming Water Wastewater Commission meeting, which happens to be tomorrow night, to request the Commission's approval to solicit RFPs for that very service, and also to update the affordability analysis that was done in that early stage as well.
I strongly recommend that be done proactively without the council having to ask for it. To me, that should be something done every year, and I know it's comprehensive, but I'm sure there are tweaks we can make to the assumptions, but as the loans get cut and as the money gets spent, it should bring us closer and closer to a realization of where we're going to end up being in the next few years. So that is critical, because it's going to mean more money out of the people's pockets. And my last question for now is, when the loans are procured, or when the loans go out to bid, when we seek a loan order, does the EPA and the DEP, or both of them collectively, do they review what the scope of the project is and they sign off on it and say, yes, this is all part of that consent decree and go ahead and do it? Or, because I had some questions from constituents who asked me, is the wastewater department taking out loans for the consent decree and then they're adding some things into that loan order that aren't part of the consent decree? So my question is are the federal and state regulatory agencies reviewing the projects that we're about to go out and perform to make sure that they're in line with what they're requesting that we do? Is there any review of that nature, or is it just...
DEP does those types of reviews. EPA does not. There's reporting requirements that are associated with the capital projects. Project has to be bid by a certain date. An engineering service has to be procured by a certain date. The work has to be completed by a certain date. That was integrated into the language for both the 2B, 3C separation project and also the 4D separation project. That type of explicit language isn't in there for the CEPT, the SSU, or the tertiary treatment projects. But DEP does review that. as a part of the SRF, as part of the package we provide for final approval for SRF, it does include the loan order, the bond council's review, I believe. It's part of that package.
Okay, so just a point of note, the $104 million that was estimated back in 2012, only a third of that is tied to the sewer separation. Half of it is tied to the East Wastewater Treatment Plant for improvements. So even though we call it the Combined Sewer Separation Project, that's usually what is at the forefront of my mind when I hear about this entire endeavor. More of the work is on the wastewater treatment plant facility upgrades and whatnot, more than it is a sewer separation
On a
project.
dollars basis, I'm sorry.
But those are also mandated by the state and the federal government that we have to do.
Correct.
Thank you.
And they also do a technical review, right, of the projects, and that's how the scope started to creep in the secondary system upgrade project as a result of DEP
That happened.
comments saying we have to do more.
That did happen for the SSU project. We submitted the DEP review copy, and they insisted that we have a third-party review of the technical design, and that resulted in some additional scope.
Does that not get done before you come to us for a request? Or does that get done after we already appropriate the loan? Is it proactively done is my question. Is that all reviewed before it even comes to us?
That particular project, the loan order for construction may have been aggressively accelerated due to the scheduling within the consent decree. So we had the design, and we were anticipating being able to go out to bid at the time that DEP put the review and additional scope upon us.
President Hay had his hand up first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think Councilor Di Natale's got a good point, and it's what I'm looking for, and I don't need an answer tonight, but I think the council needs to get it on a periodic basis, is that if 104 or 105 is what the original is, and then you have changes in scope and it increases, that's understandable. Nobody likes it, but that's understandable in reality. What we are looking, or at least what I'm looking for, and Councilor Di Natale seems to be looking for, is how does that affect the numbers that were given to us originally in relationship to borrowing money when we would need to raise rates and how much those rates would increase. If you say that the expectation is it's going to go from 104 to 120, well, what is the result of that? Ultimately, what does 120 mean in relationship to 104 in terms of time frame and percentage of increase? Does it mean instead of originally, and I don't have the number of things in front of me, we may have said that our first anticipated increase was going to be in 2018, and it was going to be X, and now we're going to start it in 17, and it's going to be Y, and it's going to change a little bit. And I know it's fluid, and I know it changes on a regular basis. But if we can be kept aware of that, I think that helps us in discussions with constituents about the project in the process. And the other thing is to keep us informed percentage-wise. You know, you could say that, you know, it's December 21st, 2030. That's the end date. Well, there's an end date, but where are we in percentage-wise? Did we anticipate that we would be 50% done by the year 2023, and now that's changed because of the add-ons and the change of the scopes of the work? So our percentage thing is going to be closer. So at the end we'll be rushing more, or are we ahead of schedule so that maybe at the end we can take a little breather and have a little space before we do some increases or some changes to the structure? Those are the things that I think the council needs in order to understand better exactly where we stand and where we stand means in relationship to increases and timing. And that's what I got some of that from the information that you guys have given us since last week, but I think we need some more of that, and we need it in more detail, and we need it on a continual basis. Don't have it be just when you come in here 2.5 years from now and say, instead of 120, now we're at 126. okay? But if we've known all along that's coming in and what the change is, it makes it a lot easier. So, thank you.
Understood.
Counselor Caddy?
I only have 6 or 7 questions, but they're all easy. Just a little, go back in a little history. Jeff, what year was the Clean Water Act? Thereabouts, you don't have to be specific.
It would have been the early 70s because it was what was precipitating the grant program and what initiated all the treatment plants being constructed in the 70s.
We signed the consent decree in 2012, but what year were we required to start the separation project? If you,
We had hard dates written into the consent decree. When you say separation, you're referring to the two projects
Yep.
that we did. We had hard dates in the consent decree, and we met the dates for awarding the construction contract and completing the construction contract for both 2B, 3C, and
No,
for.
that's not
I
my
apologize.
question. It's my understanding back in 2012 that the city was required to begin this separation project many years before 2012. When I see you shaking your head, I mean, I want to say that my memory with the council is that we had come with rate increases for years to start the separation project, but the council continued not to raise the rates to support the separation project. But I want to say, my memory was, it was like 20 years ago that this was starting. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I guess I've been hanging out here doing this for close to 15 years, I think. I think Jeff put me on this, it was Jeff, back when he was mayor. And my memory is, yes, we were constantly behind the 8 ball as to what we needed to, but there was a constant fight or the constant give and take negotiating the consent decree, but it did keep putting off the things that we needed to do to meet the Clean Water Act.
And this is all history questions. I'm just trying to set a stage here. When we finally signed in 2012, what was the fine? Was it $200,000 that we got fined? And I think the $200,000 went towards a local construction project, which might have been Green Pond.
It was approximately 150,000 fine, and it was split evenly between the state and the feds. In that we had arrived at that penalty, which was a penalty for past violations, not a stipulated penalty. That was a penalty for the past violations. We arrived at that figure having incorporated something called a supplemental environmental project, and I think that's what you're referring to.
Right.
It's a project we did that out at Coolidge Park along the brooks of the bank of Falula Brook on the eastern side of the park. There was a eroding bank of the brook, and we petitioned that to the state and the feds for acceptance as a supplemental environmental project. And the nature of these types of projects is that they're projects that are a benefit to the intent and purpose of the Clean Water Act. And it's also a way to do some good in your local community instead of paying money out to the state and to the federal government.
Here's a finance question. We're required to conclude the separation project in 2030. The estimates that we were giving in 2012, which we are exceeding now, these estimates, if you're out 15 years on the project, are these estimates in today's figures, or let's say the last project in 2029, prices go up? Are we estimating that today's prices or the prices in 2029? That question would be relevant to what this cost could actually be.
It was utilizing best estimate costs for when the projects were anticipated to take place. So they would have been trying to escalate for inflation costs and so forth. The problem is we didn't have defined and finite scope. We didn't have designs, of course, so we don't have a real good cost estimate, which is you would do for a construction project, a probable construction cost estimate right before it goes out to bid, so you have a good handle on what the prices should come in at.
The increase rate now that we're looking at, increase over what was speculated, is because of unforeseen issues. You mentioned John Fitch Highway with the water and the sewer upgrades. That's what we're looking at right now. That wasn't anyone's fault other than things that we didn't know.
That was not a consent decree requirement, but we had faulty infrastructure that was allowing infiltration to come in. The sewer was undersized. We ended up negotiating a intermunicipal agreement with the town of Lunenburg that was executed, I believe, in December of 2013, where they're going to be paying for a percentage of the CSS 4D project, which is attributable to the John Fitch Highway portion of it. So there will be a cost sharing with the town of Lunenburg for the John Fitch Highway sewer portion of the CSS 4D project.
The present contractor, when we hired them, had a reputation of bidding low, but then adding cost overruns on their projects. Have you experienced that with these people?
Have I experienced that with that contractor?
Yes.
I would agree with that.
That was what...
In the evaluation of the bids and doing reference checking on the contractor, it was a multi-team approach involving both the consultant, myself, wastewater. At the time, I was in the office of the DPW civil engineer in support of wastewater, but purchasing was also involved. The solicitor's office was also involved. There wasn't sufficient grounds for rejecting that bid. And if we went down that road with a shaky position, they could have taken the city to court and put an injunction on us from awarding the contract to the second low bidder. So we were kind of between a rock and a hard place schedule-wise. If the project got held up because it was in court, we would have no construction taking place. So on that basis, there was a decision made to award the contract to the low bidder.
And when will the present contractor's contract be up? And is there any grounds not to hire them again for the next project? Well, maybe you don't have to answer that question. I'm just, it's probably better off not answered.
That's a difficult question to answer.
Sorry I asked the question.
Obviously, we have internal experience with the contractor that has some grounds as our own internal reference. The particular project is complete with the exception of retainage that's withheld for the warranty period. So there will be one final payment requisition for this particular contractor when the remaining retainage withheld is released.
A comment on what went on down in the Lunenburg Street area, Lincoln Street, Battelle Street. I think some of the councils were on then. Total disregard for our city with concerning the sidewalks. I mean, it got to the point where you couldn't even walk down Lunenburg Street because of all the pipes and pieces of equipment, construction equipment they were leaving on the sidewalks, and it took us several weeks to get them to move it. I hope that in the future, if there's any other separation projects in the city, that is one of the main concerns for the city. I think they did a horrible job doing that, and I think it was very disrespectful, and it took us weeks for them to remove their things. Even to the point they were putting pieces on people's properties without consent. And I think that's just grounds not to hire these people again. We spoke earlier about the systems that you have recorded that don't purge or overflow, even though we're required to separate the entire city. But you said that you had been monitoring some systems that don't overflow. And will the DEP or EPA require us to separate those projects at a great cost, even though it's not a threat to the environment?
Well, technically, if there's an overflow, a combined sewer overflow to the environment, it's a violation of the Clean Water Act and the NIPDES permit. What we want to avoid is 100% separation, if at all possible. We want to avoid 100% separation of combined sewers. The end goal that I believe EPA and DEP wants, and that they expect us to be striving toward, is to eliminate those overflow events. So if the separations can be done in such a way, and whatever remains can be tackled in smaller scope projects, so that we're not dealing with another CSS 4D or a 2B 3C, whether it's a $7 million job, a $10 million job. We want to avoid that if at all possible. Within the wastewater management plan component of the consent decree, and the evaluation of the systems, the capacity assessment of the sewers, the evaluation of inflow and infiltration getting into the sewers, we're going to have recommendations on how to make improvements. And then within that wastewater management plan, and that plan submission from us is first due by July 1st of 2018. And then there's two subsequent updates to that, I believe, in 2020 and 2023. What we'll be providing in that wastewater management plan submission is a detailed list of projects and schedules to address these remaining issues.
And the last thing I have to say is more of a comment. I've got three people that email me quite a bit of the time, and with concerns about the cost overruns. And Councilor DiNatale spoke about it earlier. It would be nice, with the information that you had emailed us this week, to make that part of the public record. So some of these people are pretty smart and have a background in this. And I think that if it became public to them, I think they would feel better, but they also may have some ideas to present to us, and it'd be nice to have that, out to them.
I believe the new website has the functionality to provide updates. Bigger picture, DPW has been working on a communication plan. Part of the lessons learned that are contributing to that plan have to do with some of the bad experiences that we had through the CSS 4D project. It seemed to be more problems we had with that particular project than the preceding project, and I'm not sure how much of that is attributable to the contractor or to some of the incidents that arose as a result of the project, but for whatever reason, there were lessons to be learned in coordinating and communicating with the public and public outreach.
Thank you.
Councilor Green has joined us as well.
Thank you.
Councilor Kuchmarek.
I don't want to belabor it, but I have to at least say I think any time we hit the point where we're between $8 and $12 million beyond the original scope of work, I'd like to. It's alarming when you find out via loan order, but I guess my biggest concern, and it is with regards to rate structure, is at what point did you, how many years ago or how many months ago did we figure out we were significantly over, and I guess who is it, internally or externally via contracted services, that we discovered how significantly we were over, and that the original scope of work was going to change significantly?
It was focusing on this particular project, which is, I think, what you're referring to, the SSU project. This was precipitated and predicated upon the initial review by DEP and the third-party technical review that they insisted upon having done. That led to scope increase, and associated with that scope increase, we would have evaluated the revised scope in terms of an estimated cost, and that was done in conjunction with the initial phase of the SRF funding process. There's something called a project evaluation form that gets submitted to the state to be eligible for the next upcoming cycle of SRF. So it would be the engineers that had updated the estimated construction cost, and it would have been the result of the scope increases.
Okay. So approximately how many months ago, or would you say that you had a firm understanding of where we're at?
It would have been late in the summer.
Okay. And I guess ideally, before we authorize loan orders, much like, before you sign papers to commit for a mortgage, you'd have an understanding of how you plan to pay for this. Ideally, I'd love for us to be at the point when we're authorizing loan orders where we have a firm understanding of this is how much we're authorizing to borrow, and this is how we plan to pay it back. So we understand, what a rate structure looks like and what the increase looks like, not just, for this initial one, but for the total project cost, so that we have a sense of, and, 2025, we have a sense of what the ratepayers could feasibly be paying based upon, the updated overall project costs. I realize that that's probably, that ideal doesn't factor in now, and that we're up against, deadlines once again. How much latitude do we have here to either hold or wait on this, or are we at the point where if we delay this for another month, the EPA is going to come in? Can you give me a sense of, how long we have?
To your point, I think you don't have that detailed answer without having done the rate study, and the rate study is not a 1 week or a 1 month process. It's a little bit more involved than that. So I don't know that we could hold the project up until we have that information.
So I guess two-pronged question. How long do we have, before we hit that point where the EPA or Mass DEP say, okay, now you're now we're at the point, you're so far in violation that we're going to fine you, and how long is it before we've authorized, and then how long before we actually have the results of a study?
Well, there's difficulty in saying. I can't say when EPA or DEP will in fact fine us. I think we're more at risk for fines, and when we say fines, we're referring to stipulated penalties as provided in the consent decree. We're more at risk for those types of penalties for issues that were within our control, but delays resulting that could have been prevented by the city. Things that are beyond our control, or something that we could argue that wasn't foreseen, some of the flood issues or the 100-year flood elevation issues that we were having out at the plant as it affected our ability to finance the project. That's something that was unforeseen. The fact that this review that was put upon us and the extra scope that was added by DEP's review, that is something that we could argue that it would be contributing to a delay. But if there was something that, if we could have acted and we didn't, that creates more liability or more exposure for a penalty, if that answers the question.
It does. My concern is that, sure, we could blindly sign and say, sure, we'll pay for this and we'll do this work, but until you know how you're paying for it, that's an important question to figure out in any project management and any long-term investment in the city, is figuring out how are we paying for this. And I'd like to think that the state and the federal government would be understanding of saying, you are working with us, you added onto your scope of work, you did more than we originally told you you're going to have to do because we have to. But and then taking a time out for 4 to 6 months to say we need to figure out how we're paying for this, how our residents are paying for this, much like to Councilor DiNatale's point of, the feds and the state looked at this years ago of what's reasonable, what's reasonably within the threshold of our taxpayers and our ratepayers' finances. This is going to change dramatically. I think our ratepayers should have an understanding before we just say, sure, we'll afford it, we'll figure it out somehow, because I think that sets a bad precedent of saying we'll figure it out at some point, and what happens when we hit the point where we hit that insurmountable rate for our taxpayers, for our ratepayers. So I guess to push you on the rate study a little bit further, I mean, do we have a sense of when you could be coming back in front of us with preliminary figures for what a rate study would look like and what increases would look like?
Unfortunately, I can't. I would be dependent on the procurement process to get an RFP out to solicit engineering proposals for that service. And then we would have to award that services contract to a consultant, and then they would do the work, and then I would have the result to come back before council. I'm not sure if Rick could speak to the timeline on how it unfolded for the water division and their effort with a water rate study, just ballpark time frame. Obviously, we
I'm not writing down day one starts.
Water hasn't come to the council yet, or finance commission for.
You have to refresh my memory. I think that was in the springtime that we started talking about water. That's my memory.
Yes.
Yeah, so we were talking about doing a rate study for water in the springtime, and we don't have it. And I guess, I hear what you're saying as far as, sitting there as a commission overseeing this, that, you'd sure like to know what this is going to cost and what the impact on the rate's going to be. As we've been looking at these things, however, this clearly is in the scope of what we have to do.
Sure.
And while I wish we could tell you right now, this is how we're going to pay for it, when the rate increase is going to come, there are going to be rate increases. But I don't think we can tell you exactly what or when it's going to be, except with the exception of the fact that it's going to be there.
Right.
But that being said, from everything I know about our consent decree here, we have to do this. And we don't have that choice. And if we do put it off, I don't want to see adding rate increases to pay fines as well as paying for the work that we have to do.
And I completely agree. I think we need to, certainly, I would hate for us to be paying fines unnecessarily, but I like to make sure that we as a city are doing our due diligence and figuring out how are we financing these large-scale projects. Obviously, we have to get it done, for that reason, I'll likely be voting in favor of moving this forward, but begrudgingly without knowing the finance source of this. I have a few more questions. I mean, moving forward, the project cost will likely change. Can we develop a process or a trigger mechanism that says, any time we do this kind of initiates a new rate study increase to see how these tables will be impacted through year 2030?
We had a conversation in the commission about doing a rate study, and one of the things was the timing of that rate study,
right.
Where we had, I don't want to call it. Well, we had excess retained earnings, I guess. Sure. That wasn't the time to be saying we need a rate increase, and so spending the money for the rate study when we had retained earnings. And we had a discussion. We had a fairly lengthy discussion about what was the appropriate time to do that study, and I think that was right before we got the increased scope of work here that caused us to come back for this, the additional funding here.
At that time, the Water and Wastewater Commission also didn't have the estimated or the projected debt schedule that myself and Dick Saracen had worked up. That would have been, had the Water and Wastewater Commission had that piece of information at that time, there's a good chance that they would have voted in favor of a joint water and wastewater rate study. Unfortunately, we didn't have that information at that time to help the commission make that decision in favor of a sewer rate study.
Well, I completely understand how we are where we are right now in terms of studies, and I guess just moving forward, it's my request of every time, I guess, if we figure out, okay, we're way off track here. This looks like we're going to be $4 to $8 million off. If there is a next time, hopefully there's not, but if there is a next time, so that it triggers before we even get to the point of authorizing the order, that the commission says, you're right, let's start having the conversation now. So as soon as we have the final figures in, we can initiate the study, so that we're not 3 to 4 months behind. And it's not. I realize you're not a paid commission who's sitting down every day and just waiting to get to work from 8 to 5 to initiate these. So I certainly sympathize there. You don't have that ability to pour 80 hours a week into this. So, but just realizing how we can expedite this process so we're not 6 to 8 months off next time. And then I just have a couple of questions with regards to project management of these. When it comes to the actual kind of project management, who are we farming this out 100% to contractors? Do we have this 100% internally managed by personnel? I know, Jeff, you're certainly playing a large role in the overall project management. Can you give me a sense of kind of day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month project management and who's providing those services to us?
In both separation jobs, I did play a role previously in the treatment plant project, so I can't speak with personal experience on that. But I can speak with experience on both the 2B, 3C project, the first separation job, and the second separation job, 4D. In both cases, we had contracted engineering services to the consultant engineer who happened to be the design engineer for both projects. And there was either monthly or biweekly progress meetings that representatives of the city were meeting with both the contractor, relevant subcontractors, if there were any trade work that was ongoing, and also the project management, which would be the consulting engineer doing the office administration of it, and also the field representation. The chief resident engineer, he or she would be a part of that process as well. But we do have city involvement, of course. And in both cases, we had a city liaison person for both projects. In the 2B3C project, that was myself. And in the 4D project, it started out as me. And then when I took over this current position, the new civil engineer took over that role and duty.
Do we have any dedicated project managers that we've had to hire who are, City of Fitchburg personnel who are dedicated 100%? If we had to add any positions in order to take over project management of this?
We have not done that. The civil engineer position, the wastewater division has paid most of that person's salary, usually between 75 or 80% of that person's salary. So that person has been heavily involved in supporting the wastewater division's needs, whether it's reviewing documents, on-site inspections, being a point of contact either for the public or for the engineer or the contractor.
Thank you. I was just trying to get a general sense of, are we also, giving additional resources internally to this project beyond the scope of external services?
But for the secondary systems upgrade project, that's considered a building project by the state, so we're required to hire an owner's project manager.
Okay.
And that's one area where we are vulnerable, because the city hasn't been able to get a contract issued to the selected firm.
Understood. And my last piece is something Councilor Caddy spoke about earlier, and something, Jeff, I spoke to you about a couple of weeks ago with regards to the contractor doing the most recent round of work. And I spoke to you with fear a little bit about, Order 23015 for the $4 million. My concern here is I know state contracting and state bidding and procurement law states lowest responsible bidder. And I think responsible is kind of the operative word there. I know typically, when you're bringing in someone for the first time, it's hard to have anyone go on the record and talk about irresponsibility on behalf of the contractor. Now we've had a fairly substantial scope of work to be able to document. Have we been documenting difficulties with this contractor? Do we keep these on file so that we know the next time we have to go out to bid that we have grounds if we decide that they're being irresponsible and to be able to throw the bid out? Or, do we as a city do that? You don't have to speak specifically to this specific contractor.
We do have record documents, including not just, of course, the end record drawings, but also the documentation of the progress of the work, which is usually in the form of field book notes and also construction observation report forms. We do have a track record of claims that this contractor has been involved with. There could be grounds for that choice or recommendation. It can be a difficult thing to do given the procurement laws, though.
I know when you think about a responsible contractor, I think, on time, under budget, with minimal disruption to the day-to-day, life and flow of cities, residents, and its workers. And then I think about this current contractor and think, I have a hard time checking off any one of those boxes. They're over budget, over time. I know, what felt like my first year on council was overwhelmingly dedicated to seeing disruption to city workers and to its residents, seeing, sidewalks constantly disrupted and obstructed, access to businesses disrupted unnecessarily too. I realize there's certain things within, within the scope that don't allow you to make it reasonable, but these seem to go unreasonable disruption to the city. So I just hope that moving forward we continue to document and realize we have to operate within state procurement laws, and we certainly don't want to be out of compliance. But
it can be difficult to, in an urban environment, having lay down area for either equipment or materials. It's usually unreasonable to expect a contractor to store all the equipment, all the materials in a remote location removed from the actual location where the work is performed, or to mobilize it piece at a time. But there should be a middle ground where it could have been done better than it actually was on that particular project.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you, gentlemen.
I hope this doesn't escape everybody. What scares me to no end about this whole thing is, and I said it 2 weeks ago, is that we as a city council, in my opinion, are in the dark on this whole thing. And I'm not saying it's intentional or anything, but what I'm saying is it sounds like the department also doesn't have a firm handle on what's going on now and in the future. Because the way I'm hearing this is, I keep hearing that refrain of, we have to do it. We have to do it. We have no choice. That is a dangerous way of thinking, even though it may be true, because it almost gives that sense to the public of, we miss it by 10 million, we miss it by 10 million, we have to do it anyway. We should not, and the reason why this is important is because we have to approve the increases. In order for us to approve the increases and to approve tens of millions of dollars in loans, at the very least our due diligence should be, what is the scope of work, what is the certification of those estimates, and are the estimates provided to us already been run through the state agencies? Number one. Number two is, we knew about this scope creep back in late summer. So we talk about rate increase studies taking a long time. It's an onerous process. I get that. But gentlemen, I hate to break it to you. This is going to require numerous rate studies, and they should be proactively done. I don't really care at this point what the cost is for those studies, because missing loans by tens of millions of dollars and potentially having it grow to over 130, 140 million, that is going to devastate people's pockets, devastate them. And that's why I'm so worried about this. It's scaring me to no end right now, because we're only halfway through this project, or we have 15 more years. And there are already projects we've had that have already overrun. Whether it's our fault or not, irrelevant. They've overrun. And the concern I have is this is going to be a recurring theme, not every time, but there will be other occurrences as this happens. And I get it more than anybody. They're estimations. They're not hard and fast. That was made clear from day one. But because the estimates provided back in 2012 were so vital to us understanding this, it was because the public had an understanding at that time of what they were going to get tagged with on their bill. And every couple of years or every year, that number changes. It goes up, it goes down. There should be proactive studies done every other year in this thing, because residents right now, in a summer month, are paying hundreds of dollars a month on their bill for water usage. And what pains me to no end is I hear people say we have to vote for this because if we don't, the EPA and the DEP are going to fine us. I sit here and say, well, if I were to vote against this, it's not in defiance of the consent decree or in defiance of the regulations. I, as a city councilor, have to understand what it is I'm voting on, what it is I'm approving, and have some understanding of what the future implications of my vote is going to be. And I don't have the answer to that. I have the answer as to what happened, where we are right now, and the near future, but I'm sorry, I'm a long-term planner here. I need to know the whole scope, granted the fact that it's just an estimate, but they need to be updated. So I hear that we're talking about the study, We don't have time to talk or go through months and months of processes, because the next loan order you gentlemen come before us on, that's going to be my first question. What does this do to the revenue? What does this do to the rates? That's all I care about right now. The EPA and the state are saying that we're improving our environment. No one's disputing that, but they don't understand what this is doing to our community, our businesses. You know, I hear people sometimes say, oh, it's not that much money. Well, to people who are on fixed incomes and who are paying Unitil, it's a lot of money. And it's going to continue. No one here is disputing there'll be further increases. That was made clear on day one. The point here is no one has any idea right now what that increase is going to be or increase is. And I don't think it's wrong of me to be a little heated about this, because I'm the one, along with the other 10 here, that have to grant you those increases, and then the residents get their first bill and they see it went up even more. And we have to answer to them. So it's hard for me to just sit here and say I'm going to vote for it anyway because we have to. The federal and state government, I understand they have had it with us. We've put this off too long. But they are supposed to be protectors of everybody, correct? And, you know, what point is it in improving the environmental impact just a little bit if it's going to bankrupt half the city, is my point. So I almost don't want to thumb my nose at them, but I want to say to them, listen, I'm not disagreeing it has to be done. But we have to understand here first what this is going to mean to the city. And I'm not saying once we find out we're not going to vote for it, but it would be nice to know that ahead of time. So the questions that are being asked to me are basic questions. How are these projects being tracked? What is the proactive approach to seeing what this means to people who have to pay the bill? And this should be a recurring theme. This should not have to be asked of you by us. This should be a guaranteed thing that gets done every couple of years. So the next loan that comes before us after these two, I'm not going to vote for it. I'm not even going to whiff at voting for it until I get that information. And I don't even know how I'm going to vote on this one. Because as far as I'm concerned with the federal and the state government, they can go pound sand for right now. Because I want to know what this is going to mean to John and Jane Q taxpayer. Because one thing that gets lost in this whole discussion is this is not a property tax increase. Proposition 2.5 limits property taxes. Water and sewer, there is no limitation. So when we raise the rates, it's a tax increase that we have to vote on. So it's not so much a criticism, but to me, it's basic common sense. We have to know this stuff ahead of time, and we have to be apprised of it earlier rather than later. That's all I'm asking, because this brings concerns of the future. So while we're all caught up about where we've been, where we are, and this information is vital and it's great, and this is very comprehensive. This is what I want. I want to know the future now. What does this mean for the future? Because one thing we've established tonight is this. That original estimate is probably going to be at least $20 million more, if not $30 million more. That is monumental. That's over a third of the estimate. So whatever we thought the rates were going to be 4 years ago in 2025, you can conceivably add 33 or 40% to that number. And, you know, the feds, when they did that, when that review was done, the feds told us, well, if the median household income, if the rates are only 2% of median household income, residents can afford it, like they know. They don't have a clue. We're just a number to them. These estimates will change that, I bet. What if this goes over that 2%? Will the feds then say, well, geez, we can't hose the residents. Maybe we should be a little, and I know they've given us a lot of latitude, but, you know, this is killing residents in this city financially. A lot of them. Not all, but a lot of them. And that original estimate was key. So we need to know what this is going to mean on a recurring basis, because those estimates we got, you can almost double them as far as I'm concerned. And any rate study we do, there should be a low end, a medium end, and a very high end. And I'll be looking at the high end first, because likely that's probably what it's going to be because of scope creep, which is normal, added things onto the contract, normal. we need to have a comprehensive view of this. And unfortunately, it took this matter for that to come to the forefront, but it's got to be done, gentlemen, because we're on the hook for approving these things, and the residents have every right, every justifiable right to demand that there's full transparency on what it is we're exactly voting on. And I can't give them that level of confidence right now. And that's just how I feel about it for right now. But this has got to change, because there's no end in sight to this. And I feel like we're hiding behind that screen of, well, it's got to get done. Well, it may have to get done, but at what cost? Councilor Boschman. Okay, Councilor Green.
My question to you would be, if the city had a preferred contractors list that our procurement department could use, would that have been beneficial to you for this project?
I don't think the procurement laws would have allowed that type of thing.
So we are held by law and decree that we absolutely have to accept the lowest responsible bidder? That's how it's worded, lowest responsible?
Based on the state procurement laws.
And we don't have any wiggle room with that, or we have to wait to be sued to present our case on why a contractor would or would not be reasonable?
It would be at risk to the city rejecting a low bid that we deem to be not responsible, not a responsible bidder. If the contractor were to challenge us, I'm not sure where EPA or DEP would come down on that if there were a delay to a construction contract based on a court challenge.
Do you find that disagreeable, that would be in the city's best practices to keep operating like that? I mean, I just feel like we're just being backed into a corner in these situations, and, well, we've got to do it because that's what we are mandated to do, but are we really obligated to operate like that?
If we don't have a basis or a strong basis for rejecting a bidder, this particular, I should say, in the context of this inquiry, it's really referring to the CSS 4D project, as I understand it, reading between the lines. When these bids came in, they were fairly closely grouped together, where this low bidder was low by a pretty good amount, but then the second, third, and fourth bidders were all fairly grouped closely together. I had personal experience with the fourth low bidder. In a perfect world, if I could have picked my contractor, the fourth low bidder would have been my contractor. But the nature of the procurement for the state of Massachusetts wouldn't have allowed that. We would have had to have gotten rid of bidders 1, 2, and 3 to get to 4. As it is, we did a due diligence review, and we couldn't come up with something substantive to reject the bid that we had in hand for that particular contractor.
All right. And I know we've talked a lot about the joint study being done, and that would be the only. Do we have money for that? Or are you going to have to come before us as a council and ask for that money to be appropriated to you?
I would have to double check. Well, I don't have a proposal for starters, so I don't really have a ballpark figure. I'm not sure where water's estimate came in. It would be relatively comparable apples and apples for the water proposal price for rate study. But that being said, I would have to look at the existing budget for fiscal 16. And if it wasn't within the budget, I would have to look at the existing retained earnings or free cash for a supplemental budget appropriation for that service.
And again, just as a ballpark, because this is not my major, my study by any means, but are we talking like $5,000 or are we talking $25,000?
I'm trying to remember back for the
my
water rate study. It was
my memory was
either
in the
10 or 20,000.
10 or 15 is where I don't,
Okay, right, and I'm not asking for,
I think that's-
but
I
I
think
mean, I'd
that's
like to
the
know,
scope of what we're talking about.
so that if you don't, if you present something that says, $25,000 to $40,000, I don't have to take in air and say, oh my God, now we're even more in the hole for this overall project.
Part of what I would recommend is that we do another affordability analysis to see where we're at now relative to what was done previously. So it would be an update of that work. I think that would go very naturally hand in hand, and it would be valuable information to have that updated. As far as the consent decree goes, again, I'm doubtful that we'd be able to not do something that's in the consent decree, but what that would afford us latitude is when we had to do it by. We could petition a change to the consent decree, which actually is going back to the courts to make a change in the consent decree. But we would have, in my opinion, a strong grounds to make that kind of change if we were encroaching upon that affordability threshold.
And do you think that are we there? Are we creeping there? Or are we right off the cliff on that right now?
We haven't increased the rates since 2012, so the rates have remained level since that time. So if mean annual incomes have continued to go up in 2013, 14, and 15, but the rates haven't increased since 2012, I don't have a definitive answer, but I would suspect that we haven't increased relative to where we were at that time, if that may be the best answer I can give at this time.
Right, and that's not great. That's not a great answer. And again, I know that's hard to hear because now again we're faced with, high utility costs and now high water and wastewater cost as well. Should the residents, should we then brace for, and this is maybe not in all actuality, but should we as residents brace for a yearly wastewater increase for the next 20 years to pay for this project?
A lot's going to depend on the rate study. The rate study will define operating costs, capital improvement project needs, so it's going to define what's really need to effectively run the enterprise. Once you know what you need, then you can develop a few different alternatives in terms of how you get that funding, whether it's at the last Finance Committee meeting I was attended in November, there were comments that that big level increase, if we had a do-over, it would have been preferable if we had a stepped increase. That was kind of my take. I'm not sure if you would confirm that, Mr. Chairman.
I believe there was discussion about it, moderate increases over a period of time versus, I think the 2012 one was like 60-something% they went up. That was a sticker shock to everybody when they got the bill. So, if the 66% increase would last 3, 5, maybe let's say 5 years, maybe it was better if the city would phase that in by doing 10% a year or 15% a year. I think what we did is we all front-ended it and just hit them with the 67 right there instead of did a gradual increase that still was 67% because that's what was required to pay the loans. But since it carried us 5 or 6 years, it would have been probably nice to. So that's part of the study that should be done. That's just my opinion.
If I could, I'll tell you, there was a lot of discussion in the commission as to what should be presented, whether it was incremental each year or, and the discussion ended up coming with what we did at the time was the large one not coming every year and death by 1,000 cuts. It was felt that made some sense, and there was the rate study that we did at that time had presentations as to what the impact would be over that period of time if we had surplus and then ultimately coming to a rate increase further down the road. So it can be done either way, and I know there was discussion at the commission level. I don't remember what the discussion was at the council level at that time.
Councilor Green, it was my recollection was that because of the projects that we had right out of the gate. I believe the rate study or the affordability study that was done about what the costs were up front necessitated that. But if we can mitigate that in the future, that's my recommendation, because people's incomes are not going up 66%. You know, if incomes are going up, it's by 5 or 6% maybe, or 2 or 3%. But my point is that that's why it's got to get phased in. We can't do 66% in year 1 and then 66% in year 7. You know, it's got to be incremental to keep pace with inflation and median income. And, you know, that's painting with a broad brush. Not everybody's getting median income increases. Some are actually getting decreases. So, but continue, Council. If that's...
So again, I think operating under city best practice moving forward, I would like to see that gradual increase, even if it's every year for the light. I mean, we've got another 15 years on this project. And I'd hate to say to residents, oh, well, yeah, every 5 years expect to pay, you know, 66% of what you're paying now every one of those 5 years. I just assume that everybody would know what that's going to mean, so they can budget for that. Because there are people that still do budget and budget quite tightly in their checkbooks. My last 2 points are, can you tell me how many employees there are in the water department and how many employees there are in the wastewater department?
Wastewater approximately has 30 employees. I can't speak to how many employees the water.
It's roughly 25.
And this is a difficult question. If push came to shove and we as a council had to say, okay, we can afford you the rate increase to pay this project, but we're not going to hire any more personnel, what would that be detrimental? I mean, again, I'm looking over 15 years, but as of right now, moving forward with this project, what are you planning on doing for personnel?
We don't have staffing needs projections that are with planned increases in personnel. I don't have intentions to increase the collections crew or the treatment operators or maintenance people or the lab staff above those positions that we do have. So there isn't a plan to increase staffing.
Okay. And Lenny, anything with water that you...
No, I mean, they're just in the process of bringing on the 3 people that were authorized during this budget cycle, but I don't think there are any other plans to hire anybody over and above that.
Okay. And my last point, and again, I'm all for, citizens on patrol and, giving citizens the, projects. Would there ever be a point in time where we could let citizens comment or have the ability to do these construction site observation forms? Even online, if they were to say, oh my God, Lunenburg Street is completely a mess with, you can't walk down the sidewalk. We've got mothers that are pushing carriages now in the middle of the street. I mean, would that ever be anything that we could foresee public actually being able to take a proactive role in and be part of these projects, or would that just be problematic?
I think you're really speaking to a mechanism for public concerns or complaints to be gotten into the city so that we hear them. I can't say necessarily without having a resume of a constituent in front of me if they'd be qualified to be a construction site superintendent. Nor do I have the ability to dictate that our consulting engineer hires a City of Fitchburg resident to fulfill that role. But if there's a population of 40,000 in the City of Fitchburg, that's a lot of set of eyes that could potentially see issues and get concerns into the city if they were to have them. I think that the the new city website has a mechanism in it that will allow constituents to get their complaints in. I'm not sure if you've had any more discussions on that. Something close to the see-click fix functionality.
You know, they were looking into whether see-click fix would continue or it would be replaced by something on the new website, but I think for now they're continuing with see-click fix.
And again, the only reason for that question would be not necessarily to create more work or need a response, but to go back to if we could build a case that our contractors or the workers were not.
Councilors, can we keep the discussion to the loan and not focus on the contractor themselves? And I know they're relevant, they're possibly relevant questions, but I don't want to creep into discussions about a specific contractor or the work that they've done. It's already been indicated that they have, that there are issues at hand and that they've been documented. I mean, I don't want to get the council in trouble for publicly speaking ill of a contractor that I know there's laws behind that, so I just want to be careful with this.
All right.
I want it to stick to just the loan here.
All right.
So-
Thank you. I'm done.
Okay. President Hay.
Real quick, we've all talked ad nauseum about getting more information and having the rate study so that we can use that in our determination. But did I hear that the rate study that you guys will be hoping to do may be dependent upon it going through the purchasing department, and that could ultimately, it's a yes, no. Could that ultimately be a roadblock to the time frame that you would like to have the rate study be done in?
It's a yes and no type of response. If we were to utilize one of the two cities' on-call engineering consultants that we have under contract by way of the community development contracts, which presently are Time Bond and Weston and Sampson engineers, those particular contracts have been extended an additional year for a fifth year. We could, traditionally what we would do is we would solicit competing quotes from the two consultants that we have under contract. The difficulty is if we wanted to open this up to more competitive proposals from other firms, just as a for instance, the firm that did the affordability study in the initial costing work,
But Jeff, what I'm getting at is, if you open it up to more competitiveness, that will take longer because of the purchasing department and the procurement process.
affirmative. That would be an
Okay.
RFP process to solicit a new engineering.
And secondly, did I hear Lenny talking about that we are vulnerable because we can't get a contract done in relationship to one of the ongoing projects?
Yeah, I mean, Jeff had mentioned earlier that, as far as being susceptible to fines from the EPA, if there are things that are out of our control, we're probably not at risk, but if there are things that are under the city's control, we would be at risk, and we're at risk because we've been trying to get an OPM contract awarded for 9 months, and it hasn't.
Right, and it hasn't got that done. So the inability of the procurement department to get that contract done has put us at risk. I don't want to beat a horse and go around the ring, but all we can, as a council, can certainly ask the new administration that will be coming in a few weeks to make sure that the questions that we ask these guys to get us answers for, they have the ability to do that without getting blocked by that department, and that contract that they need to get done so that we can avoid fines gets done in a more timely manner than the 9 months it's taken them, and they still don't have it. Thank you.
I strongly, on that note, suggest you don't go through the RFQ process for the rate study. Do yourselves a favor. Do the ratepayers a favor. Councilor Caddy.
I just want to make a comment on the same thing. Rick, I heard you say earlier that
you don't want to see a rate increase go towards to pay for fines. And then within minutes, I heard the commissioner talk about not confirming a contract with someone, and the first thing that went off my head was what you said. And it's happened with other departments in the city. When we're up against the EPA and the DEP, and they're talking about fines, I was there the day when we signed that, or came to an agreement. It's no joke. When they're going to fine you, they're going to fine you. And I think they were very nice to us the last time to keep the fine in a project in the city, but I think they were pretty clear the next time we're in a lot of trouble. And if there's a problem with getting a contract, I think that document should go on the top of the pile, because I think the next fine we get levied will be an awful lot more than what we got the first time.
If I could, without putting my foot in it, say, as a business person functioning as a commission, I don't totally understand the way the private sector works versus the public sector, but that is something that, as a commission, is extremely frustrating when we're asking why things aren't happening and we don't get answers.
The schedule for fines, too, can accelerate very quickly. So it's something to be very cognizant of.
Can you gentlemen please explain to me, well, not here, but can there be a communication sent to explain why it takes 9 months to procure something? Please, I'm begging you to send me something. I'm not trying to be funny here, but 9 months, and it's probably going to take a year. I can't conceive for the life of me how something can take 9 months. You submit a request, the request gets reviewed, it gets rejected or approved or sent back for clarification. Why does that take 9 months? I would like to have some correspondence on what's going on with that, because when we hear things like that, what other reaction can we have? I don't know what else to say. But to keep it in the context of the loan, I'm sorry, I could go another 20 minutes on this subject. But all seriousness, can we please get something in writing about what's going on with that? I mean, I could ask that about every department, but this one in particular, because of the EPA and the DEP attaching their teeth to our necks here, you know what I mean? I'd like to see something. I'm sure we all would. Just to get an understanding and see if we can help push the process along. Thank you. Councilor Clark had his hand up next. President Hay?
Move that 22915 be adopted as amended of 31.25.
Second.
Motion made and seconded to approve 229-15 as amended to read 31.25 million. Just a recollection, councilors, we already amended this petition back in committee.
Correct.
So a motion has been made and seconded to approve 229-15 as amended. Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor of adoption?
Aye.
All those opposed? One in opposition. Passes 3-1.
Move that 230-15 be adopted.
Motion made and seconded to approve 230-15 in order that the City of Fitchburg has authorized the appropriation and borrowing of $4 million for sewer system projects and ongoing repair and rehabilitation of the sewer system infrastructure. Any discussion on the motion? Council Boschman, you're on the committee.
Oh, okay, sorry.
There's already been a motion
Sorry
made.
about this, Steve.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? One in opposition. Passes 3-1. It'll go before the City Council meeting on December 15th.
Move that we adjourn.
Second?
Motion made and seconded to adjourn. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you.